The president has not federalized the National Guard and deployed them into a state without that state's consent since 1965, which is when President Lyndon B. Johnson federalized the Guard in order to protect civil rights marchers who were marching from Selma to Montgomery in Alabama. So this is extremely rare. And in this case, it's actually unprecedented because at the time, President Johnson was invoking the Insurrection Act. That is the authority, the primary exception to the Posse Comitatus Act that allows federal armed forces and the federalized National Guard to quell civil unrest, which would otherwise be a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act.
So the president, in this instance, as I understand it, is relying on a separate piece of the law, which, by my reading, requires a rebellion. That's the justification. What is the legal definition to meet that standard?
Well, there is no legal definition of rebellion in that particular law. Now, the word rebellion also appears in the Insurrection Act. And courts have, unfortunately, basically said that a rebellion is more or less what the president says a rebellion is under the text of the law. However, and this is important to understand, the Department of Justice has historically interpreted this authority much more narrowly in keeping with the Constitution and tradition, and has basically said that the Guard should not be federalized, federal troops should not be deployed, except in situations where state and local law enforcement are completely overwhelmed and there's been a request for help, or in situations where state and local law enforcement are sort of sitting back and doing nothing and letting all of this unfold, which, as we've seen, is very much not the case here.
Well, John Miller made the point earlier in this hour that the LAPD, which has quite well-trained riot control units, et cetera, they were there in less than an hour. There's another issue that you have raised, which is that it's not just about L.A., based on what the president is claiming here. He's effectively preemptively claiming the power to do the same elsewhere.
That's right. In fact, his memorandum doesn't even mention Los Angeles. It authorizes the deployment of federalized National Guard forces and active armed duty forces anywhere in the country where protests against ICE activity are occurring, regardless of whether those protests involve any violence, or in places where protests are simply likely to occur. And, you know, that could really be anywhere in the country. That kind of preemptive, nationwide deployment of the military to effectively police protests is unprecedented, incredibly dangerous, and an abuse of any law the president might be relying on.